You're listening to the Cantina Cast, your home for thought-provoking Star Wars talk. Join Albert and Jonesy in breaking down the latest news, trailers, movies, and of course, your favorite characters from a galaxy far, far away.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cantina Cast. My name is Albert Padilla, and this is episode 605. For tonight, we are going to break down the second arc in season 2 of Andor, and it was a very, very dense series of episodes here, 4, 5, and 6, with a payoff, I think, at the very end, at least for me personally, and without its controversy, because you know what, it's Star Wars, and what would Star Wars be without controversy? So we're going to get into all of that, break it all down for you guys, and to joining me tonight to do all of that is, of course, Jonesy. Jonesy, welcome to the show. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well, man. Fresh off a screening of Revenge of the Sith this week, so that's super exciting. So tonight's the last night, so if some people are out there watching that instead of here at the show, we'll forgive you. We understand.
Yeah, for sure. It's all good.
How are you this week? Besides running ragged, trying to keep up with this show.
This is a freaking, it's not even a marathon. This is like a 100-meter dash. I've got one leg, strapped to the other leg, and I haven't eaten in 3 days. So it's just very, very challenging to be able to, break all of this stuff down and be of value to people to listen and watch. So we're doing it, but my goodness, I don't want to do this ever again. It's just a lot to try to, again, consume in such a short period of time and then to deliver on it. So
yeah, there's a lot of Easter eggs you can go digging for in these episodes as well, if you really want to, which we just won't have the time to get into all of them, but there's quite a few in all of this. So if you're one of those folks that enjoys it, go look for it with a deeper eye, with a more discerning eye, and you'll find a lot of them.
Yeah, and I feel bad. I wanted to go look at was it the Declassified that they're doing now?
Dude, Declassified is so good.
I know. I've heard good things about it. I haven't watched a single one yet for this arc or the arc before.
You are really missing out, man. They really do a good job of giving you a little insight as to what you're seeing on screen. They're really, really good.
Yeah, so we're just going to wing it here. We're going to make stuff up. Before we do all that, though.
Yeah, the one thing we don't have to make up every week is our amazing Patreon members. So huge thanks to our now part of the tribe. Alex, Raphael, Danny, Mike, Lauren, Dante, Riss, Jackson, Sharkman, Dan, Daz, Uncle Leon, Josh, Jacob Reader Reborn, and I've got a Brad Phelan, and our Delusions of Grandeur members. Now, this is Rod Racing, CJ, Steve, and Rob. Special little shout out to our YouTube members as well. You could be like one of these amazing folks, Alex, Danny, and Zerallins. Thank you for joining the YouTube membership. It's just $1 if you want a little cool Cantina Cast logo by your name and a few custom emojis. We'd appreciate it. Just toss a couple nickels our way, and you get a little something from it. So appreciate everyone coming out, and thank you for all your continued support.
Yeah, no, thank you guys for, especially the patrons, but everybody that's ever supported the show here recently. I meant to also we actually had a podcast review, which we haven't had in a while. There's one that dropped just a couple months ago and we missed it. So we need to talk about that. But if you guys are willing to do so, please drop us some really nice things, or they can be bad things. We just won't read them on the air. But if you give us the good, nice things on a podcast review for iTunes, we'll definitely give you a shout out here on the show. So we'll pick that up next week. All right. Before we get started, just a couple programming notes. Let's see. This Sunday, we've got the breakdown. This is going to be a Patreon exclusive. This will be the breakdown of the Ahsoka Season 2 mock trailer. I don't know what I would call that thing, but that teaser thing that they showed us here at Star Wars Celebration. We'll break that down, kind of explain what we see and speculate recklessly on what season 2 is going to look like. And then next week, I think we've got our, the 20th anniversary, 20 years later for Revenge of the Sith. So you and I have had a chance now to watch both these in the actual theater. I went on Thursday. You went last night?
Yeah, Tuesday. Yeah.
Yeah, Tuesday. Sorry. Yeah, I went Tuesday. You went last night. And different experiences, I think. But we won't get into this because I don't want to turn this into a way station. But it made a ton of money back in the theaters, which is really kind of amazing. And super grateful that everybody is going out and checking that movie out because it's deserving of more attention.
Yep. Real quick before we get started, thanks to all the folks that show up in the live stream, cantinacast.com/YouTube if you'd like to come out and join us on the stream, like Alex Music Train, Risk Bayless, good to see you, Migo, One Up versus CPU, My Star Wars Guys, Zorallins, Wyatt. If there's anybody I'm missing, I will catch you on the back side of all of this. So thank you for coming out. We certainly appreciate it. We see you folks in the background. We hope you'll come on onto the stream, say hello, so we can put your name up on screen and make sure we welcome you at the very end of the show as well.
Okay, let's get into it. We've got 3 episodes to break down again. This is 3 BBY, so a year after the last arc.
Or do you mean BBY 3?
Or BBY 3 if you're Tony Gilroy. But yeah, this is Ever Been to Ghorman? I Have Friends Everywhere, which was a code phrase. And what a festive evening, which was a very appropriate title given what happens at the end of that third episode.
So uncomfortable.
It really did. But give me your opening thoughts, I guess, on this arc in particular. And then after we do that, I want to just kind of, maybe you can work it into your opening thoughts, but I wanted to have like a section where we just talk about like things that have changed since the last year, right? Things that we've noticed, because there were some very, I think I would say significant developments in some of the characters, and some of the, there's some questions about how and why certain things happened. I wonder how they're going to fill all that in. But let's start with your opening thoughts. What did you think about this arc?
Yeah, and we may have to just kind of do it as we go through the show because that's quite a bit. Very long episodes, right? This took a long time to watch. I think this was like 2.5 hours, maybe 2.5 plus this week for all this. So big time commitment, and I think really dense and very deliberate and methodical, right? Which I think, and maybe we can talk about it now. I think might turn some people off. I think I looked in Discord today, and one of our longtime viewers said that it was really long. It kind of lost him. It that momentum and stuff. You get the payoff at the very end of the third episode, which I'm actually very thankful for, that we get this resolution of sorts. Maybe a little less this week, but you do get some sort of resolution for each one of these years as you go, which is kind of the benefit of keeping it to just a few days, and you're not going to pick it up. And while you'll leave the bigger arcs open, you can close out these smaller ones. So I appreciate that. And I think it was good. I like this a lot, actually, but it was very dense, and it just took a while to get through it and watch it play out and have the patience to for it to play out. And if that's not your speed, this is probably kind of tough, right, to be able to do this. And so I'm kind of wondering, I'm hoping that we don't lose some casual viewers as a result of like the way these 3 episodes played out, which I think is entirely possible. This kind of happened with season 1 too. As you get into the kind of the meat of the story and you're kind of pulling things together, you have to wait for the bigger payoffs later on, but you're asking a lot of your audience to stay with you. And I think that's something that we'll have to continue to watch and see. Do we pick up this momentum and get into next week's episodes? We know we're going to get to K2SO, so there might be something to pull people in there. But does this kind of wither some of our momentum and enthusiasm from the first week? I don't know. We'll have to kind of see. I think like you said, there's a lot of great elements in this episode, some really uncomfortable stuff, some weird stuff, and like some really weird stuff. And Saw's just off his rocker, I think, as usual. But good moments that we can build on. But we'll have to see generally if people kind of stick around with it. What about you?
Well, yeah, I mean, I said at the very top of the show that it was a very dense episode. There was just a lot of dialogue. There was a lot of exposition that was being laid out. And yes, we did have pockets of this in season 1. But I think it was because it was dispersed among a number of other episodes that had more action and stuff, right? It felt more balanced. This really felt like we hit a heavier moment in the second season. And I don't know how else to kind of explain that, other than to say that I think if you found Andor appealing and you enjoyed this kind of, storytelling, you probably really love this. And I'm with you. Like, I really, really like this. But at the same time, I was very conscious and aware, especially during this arc, of like, ooh, I can see where people are going to watch these and go, man, that was boring. Or we had, almost 2.5 hours and really not that much happened. I'm using air quotes here because I get, it depends on what your perspective is. I'm going to go back to something I said back in 1999. I just quoted this on social media not too long ago. I have always said that Star Wars is for everyone, but not all of Star Wars is not all of Star Wars is for everyone, right? And you're going to have to find and pick and choose what really does appeal to you, because there is an audience for this type of storytelling set in Star Wars, and it can get even more dense and it can get heavier, and we can get into more adult themes. Like we kind of graced by, drug use in this episode, right? We had an on-screen lesbian kiss for the first time in Star Wars. All I'm saying is those types of things are probably going to keep coming.
Not the first time.
Not the first time, but yeah, we had it in this series, I should say. My apologies. But, those types of things are going to continue to come, and there's going to be an audience because Star Wars is just so big. I know I've said this so many times and I don't want to get on a soapbox about it. But that said, I really, really enjoyed this arc. I thought it was riveting and not like in a action-packed, edge of my seat, gripping my pillow kind of thing. but it was really intense, and I was wanting to know more about the characters. I think I'm just invested that much in these characters now that they could sit there and be making. I mean, I could have watched Cassian chop vegetables up for 45 minutes talking, and I'd been totally fine with it. You know, I know you're shaking your head, but that's where I'm at.
It's a little strange, yeah.
But there was some really great stuff in here too. Like I wasn't sure where Cyril Karn was going earlier on in the episode. I was thinking, oh my God, is he really going to go this path of like being aware and, upset about what the Empire is doing? It's like, oh, nope. Then I started feeling bad for him because I mentioned in the last breakdown that I thought, is Deidre using him? Right. And I kind of got the sense that maybe she is kind of using him here in some ways, maybe not as blatant as, you would hope it not to be, but it definitely feels like she's using him, or she's got him as an asset. Right. And so more on that as we get into that.
This is why you need to go watch Declassified.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I haven't seen that. I loved Ghorman as kind of like this Paris, France landscape and the revolution that starts there. I mean, their accents sounded like French, like they were speaking French.
The language they based it all on was French, actually. And then they modified it from there. Yeah. Okay.
Well, and again, I haven't seen Declassified, so this is just me spitballing.
Very insightful of you, Albert. Well done.
Yeah. Well, it was the accent at first, but then just the settings, right? And the way everything looked. And you think about like what France went through, like with the Revolutionary War and their uprisings, and they've got a battled history. I just saw a lot of parallels that were kind of jumping out there that were kind of right in your face at times.
Yeah.
Also, Benjamin Bratt coming in as Bail Organa. Like,
talk about a great recast. Like
I thought it was amazing.
If you have to recast someone, you really couldn't have. I mean, they have similar features. They have similar mannerisms. They don't necessarily look entirely alike, but they have enough that's similar. And Benjamin Bratt's amazing, right? Anybody that's watched Law and Order, you know what you're getting. So,
or Blood In, Blood Out. I mean,
yeah,
whatever.
I mean, his slate of films and TV shows is great. So,
yep. So Latinos are we're doing really well right now in Star Wars. And then at the same time, just go back. I did take a note also about the viewer retention. It's going to be interesting to see how many people jump out at this one. Because I was thinking after the first 2 episodes, I thought, okay, we're going to ramp up to something really action packed. And we didn't get there. Like we had an action sequence and it was tense, but most of that was because they were cutting back and forth and they weren't giving you the story in one piece. But really, it wasn't that tense. I mean, it was,
they were never really in danger.
Right. They were never really in danger. You knew that Clea was going to be able to do that, because otherwise that would have been all hell break out right there, then and there. We knew that wasn't where it was going to go.
That was probably more tense than what was going on in Ghorman, actually.
Yeah, fair enough.
Because you had Krennic there. That threat was more real there than I think it was on Ghorman, because they were cluing us in what was happening on Ghorman from an Empire perspective.
Yeah, so I think anybody that was kind of waiting for this arc to have, the kind of what we had at the very beginning of the first arc with Cassian stealing the Avenger, they were probably let down by that, and they're probably looking at this going, but this was kind of boring, or there really wasn't a whole lot that happened, and there was a lot of people just talking the entire time. But that's, again, back to what I said at the very beginning. That's what we are. So
I talked, before you move on from that, I talked to some people at work. Actually, they talk about Andor, and what I found is most of these they're Star Wars fans. They seek it out, so they're not. I wouldn't necessarily call them entirely casual, but they're, I don't know, fast casual. I don't know what you call them, but anyway, they were telling me that they've still not got through the first week. Like they're having to space these out. Like I'm trying to do one a night, but it's kind of tough because they're really long, and I'm kind of wondering if this is going to be a bit of a slow burn, and people are going to have to draw this out because. There's fewer of us than there are of the masses, right? That are trying to consume all this at once and then talk about it.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that's probably going to be prevalent. So it'll be interesting if we ever get any numbers, kind of what these things look like, because I imagine it's going to skew a bit. It's going to be a little bit harder to find. The title of Declassified, by the way, Albert, was called World Building. And while it was talking a lot about Ghorman and how they built Ghorman at Pinewood Studios, which absolutely stellar. This was all real. Like even the insides, it was like one gigantic set, like just massive.
Yeah.
I think in general, world building fits these 3 episodes in general, especially with what they're trying to do on Ghorman and building that broader picture of what's happening. Why is this? Why is it kind of important? What are the seeds they're trying to sow in our minds, as well as build up this idea so they can set up the Ghormans to fail in the end. So there's a lot of intricacies, I guess, that go with a lot of that. Again, we will have payoff in bigger spades later on, but we have to take the time to kind of build it all right now. So I thought the title of that Declassified was actually very appropriate in a multifaceted kind of way.
Mm-hmm. Was there anything that really just jumped out at you from a timeline perspective, given that this is now a year later? Like, what stood out for you as a development, either for a character or, I don't know, even a location, the Empire, the rebellions? What stood out for you?
Yeah, probably a few things, and maybe one was a little more subtle. It took a little more time to get there. Was I think the Ghorman Front, right? I mean, the Ghorman Front is entirely fabricated by the Empire, is what it looks like. So that was a little unexpected. I think it's like, how are they going to do this? And it seems like they're actually doing it. I think also the kind of the using of Cyril Karn and how they've kind of embedded him as kind of a field agent in that way. And there's still subterfuge going on. I think that was another element.
Yeah.
I think even Cinta, like we talked about, like, is Tay Coleman dead? Right. And while I still think he is, but her tale about she was injured, something went wrong about a year ago, and she was sidelined for a while.
Yeah.
Makes you think, okay, she may have carried out her task, but it did not go smoothly for whatever reason.
Right.
I don't know if they'll ever get that story now because, spoiler alert, we are going to be talking spoilers, everyone, but since it didn't make out the other side. And so I think those were some fronts there. I think the story with Bix was interesting, that she's still struggling so much, even after really kind of 2 years removed from these traumatic events and then a year from the previous traumatic events. And it kind of takes her, and then her turn is kind of really severe at the end, but maybe that makes some sense as well. We'll talk a little bit about Bix, but I think that was another element that was just curious, right? And yeah. But those were probably the major ones that stood out to me from a leap from last week to this week, from year over year.
Yeah, let me pick up where you left off on Bix, because I almost got the sense that she's been through even more trauma since then, right? Especially as how defensive and guardian Andor is towards her, So, and it's on one hand, on one hand, I really wish that we would get some of that context and try to understand, like, I want to know what happened in that last year. Now it seems like a lot did happen. And are we ever going to get those stories? Like you asked just a minute ago, I don't know that we are. And it's, it's kind of unfortunately, it's because of how we're doing the storytelling. He's doing 5 years and four seasons, or 4 years and 4 arcs, or whatever it is, 3 arcs. And so we are going to lose some of that. But that Bix's development seemed a little bit more severe than I thought. And I just kind of chalked that up to, she's had some more run-ins with the Empire. Maybe she's had other traumatic experiences, but to see her leap, and I don't know if that's fair because I don't know what really happened, but to see her leap from where she was in the last arc to suddenly, drug usage to kind of numb the pain and go to bed and fight off the demons, that seems like a lot more has happened than just that. And I'm not taking anything away from what happened. That's traumatic in itself, but it just feels like there was more there. I think Saw Gerrera was another one too. Like, when we last saw Saw Gerrera, okay, he was a rebel. He was, a terrorist in a lot of ways, almost by every definition, but he has that craziness about him. And it just came, he does a good job of explaining it. We kind of get a sense for it, but I want to know the story behind all that. Like, how long has this been happening? And it's a new development. Here we are, a year later, for us to finally see that. And yeah, the other one that stood out was just Cyril Karn and I didn't know where that was going to go, honestly, in the first arc. And to see him now, like you said, embedded in there as a field agent, kind of playing with the audience at the very beginning about whether or not whose side he really was going to be on. Does he have a moral compass in himself? But then I started thinking about it more as the episodes were going on. I'm like, no, we pegged this guy during season 1, and we knew that this was exactly what he was going to want. He was going to want to rise within the ranks of the Empire, the ISB. And, when he had that moment at the very end where he was like, would it ruin it if I told you this is the greatest day of my life?
Right. Like,
that was him to a T. Like that everything had led up to that moment in his head. And he was you could see him thinking about it.
Yeah, we'll dig into a few of these moments here when we kind of go through a bit of the walkthrough for each of the character groupings here. But there's a lot to kind of dig into all of this, but we should probably get started. Do you want to start off with Saw? Because that's probably the more straightforward and simple part of the episode, if you will. Yeah,
and it was actually one of my favorite parts, honestly, of all of it. It was just, I loved everything about it. But
it was nice to see Willman, sync up with Saw, kind of what we anticipated was going to happen, right?
Yeah, we said that he would probably get there, and we said that he'd probably be radicalized. I wasn't expecting the whole Rhydonium, like, drug-induced type thing, but
that was so special.
Whatever it takes,
Right.
But the gist of this one is that Willman is there. I think he was sent by Bix or someone, because at the very end, he's about to blurt out something before he gets, I forget now. There's something that says it's either Bix or he was sent there by Luthen, right?
Yeah.
was my take. But he's sent there because he has knowledge on accessing some kind of a machine that's able to extract the rhydonium from certain mines or pipes or whatever it is. And depending on where, this is how my interpretation, you tell me if I got this completely wrong, but depending on where the rhydonium is, there's multiple ways to extract this. And the complexity for each type of extraction is very unique depending on where that rhydonium is coming from. It's not something everybody can do. And so Saul calls him in to teach another guy that we learned about named Pulte, or is it Pluti or Pulte? I forget now.
Pluti, I think.
Pluti. And he wants Willimon to teach Pluti how to do all of that. So before we get into all the kind of the specifics here, it was just very interesting that one, he would end up with Saw Gerrera. It was great to see them on Dakar. It was awesome to see, Two Tubes was back, and some of these characters from Rogue One. But a lot of this played out exactly like we thought it was going to. I think what threw me for a loop, at least in the story earlier on, was this idea that Saw Gerrera was thinking about killing Wilmon. And I thought, man, that's going to be terrible if that actually happened. So I loved everything about this. I just loved everything that was going on here, especially with you not really sure at any point what freaking Saw Gerrera was going to do.
It's always the trick with Saw, right? You really just never know what he's actually thinking. And quite honestly, it's hard to tell if he knows exactly what he's going to do from moment to moment either, because he's just on the seat of his pants. But he's really, he's deceptively highly intelligent and smart and perceptive, right? And I'm not saying that he portrays anything different, but when you hear him talk, you kind of hear the crazy come out, but the wheels are always turning. He's always got an idea. He's always like peering into people more than what they believe he's probably capable of doing. And I think that's kind of what played out here, especially when he susses Pluti out as a traitor and someone that's going to report back on their dealings with the Empire and be ambushed. But yeah, it was a little uncomfortable thinking that Wilmon had traveled all this way. He was doing these things. It was high pressure. There's a lot at stake. If they get this wrong, it just ignites and blows up, right? And the guy's kind of struggling. You kind of feel that frustration of like, how am I going to remember all of this stuff within just a day or two or whatever it is, and to be able to do that and not kill everybody, and
right.
So it was interesting to kind of watch that play out and see some of Wilmon get a little bit of time to shine, I think, in an extent, but also be able to connect with a character like Saw, which again I don't know that we saw it happening like this, right? And especially that dialogue that we had from Saw that was from the teaser and the trailer.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know that I saw that kind of playing out. I think you had said that looks kind of like Wilmon that he was talking to, so good call there. But it was a little different than what I anticipated his turn to be. I thought he would have really leaned into, he built the bomb, we're not doing enough, and having more of that rebellious spirit, so to speak, to where he's just outright kind of revolting against sitting on the sideline, being in a field, laying low, creating this life. It was great, but I had a girlfriend, but we had to leave all that behind yet again. It's time to take it to the Empire, but that didn't really come out. So again, we'll see where that progresses over the next couple years, I guess, and see if he gets more eager and gets more aligned with kind of Saw's group of people.
Yeah, I think that honestly, the drug is probably the catalyst for it, right?
Yeah.
He was already susceptible given what he'd been through. We kind of pegged that and said that was probably going to happen, but I wasn't expecting this kind of X factor of now he's hooked on this rhydonium just like everybody else. And that's probably going to drive him crazy. I mean, we can clearly see what it's done to Saw Gerrera. So who knows how he's going to react to that a year later from now.
Yeah. So along those lines, I got to ask you, like, what was Saw talking about his sister? Was he talking about Steela when he's like, she loves me, and just kind of going off? Was he just in I don't know what you call it, like a Rhydonian induced state where he somehow feels connected with his sister, that she's somehow present around him, and that's the feeling that he gets. It's just her presence showing up.
Yeah, that's exactly what I took. Now, I'm not going to sit here and try to explain it, because I don't know that either one of us can really explain it, but somehow he's mixed these two things up, right? His lost sister. By the way, this is a Clone Wars episode. One of the very first arc that he was ever introduced in was in Clone Wars, and he loses his sister there on Andor. And somehow he's weaved the reality of what happened there with associated that now with the rhydonium, and he's kind of in this crazy, he's mixing these realities, and he's in his own reality at this point. But that's exactly what it is. Like, he sees the rhydonium, I think, as his sister, or some kind of, the spirit of her or whatever else. I mean, he gets into that whole thing about, what it is, he says, I've always loved you. I was thinking about Sweet Leaf from Ozzy Osbourne when this was going on. If you know what I'm
Black
talking
Sabbath.
about. Yeah. If you know, you know. But it's very similar to what happens in the lyrics for that song. But yeah, he's just so like far out there, which I thought was, again, it's very intriguing. It certainly keeps you on your toes about what's going to happen. Even the very, like, I like the fact that too, that when, just to kind of back that up, when he was talking to Pulte, you could see a few times when you watch it, he's actually trying to dig for information from Saw Gerrera on where they're going to go next. And he uses the variations as a reason why he needs to know. He's like, oh man, Saw, I've got so many stuff in my head. And if you could just tell me where we're going to be tomorrow, then I could just focus on that one variation. And Forrest Whitaker, by the way, my goodness. I mean, that guy's always had an amazing acting career, but I really like what he's doing with Saw Gerrera. I've always liked it. It just feels like it's so like next level in terms of acting. What a gift to have this kind of a crazy character to play. And he does it so well. But, you know, you can see Saw Gerrera, you can see through Forrest Whitaker's kind of portrayal here that he's completely on to what this guy's talking about, even though Pulte thinks he's, you know, got one up on him. And so when he finally tells him, yeah, it's the Marquez moon and all that, really setting him up for all of that. And then to turn around and say he's a traitor. And then, you know, of course they know that the Empire's sitting there waiting for them out there and then they're going to go somewhere else to get the Rhydonium. All of that was really great. But yeah, I mean, going back to your point, like I loved by the way, his monologue there. It's another great monologue. It's very different than some of the other monologues because there's such a high level of craziness in it. But some of the stuff he was saying was just awesome. Like, let it in, boy, that's freedom calling, let it run. I mean, that's like some of the stuff that he was saying and the way that was being delivered by Forrest Whitaker was really, really, really good stuff for Star Wars in terms of like acting and delivery. But I don't know where this goes. I honestly don't know where this goes at this point. What about you?
Yeah, and Wyatt mentioned Mask of Fear in the chat, and I think this is where, if you read Mask of Fear, you get a little bit of different flavor of some of the stuff too, and you actually get a better understanding. And like Saw kind of practices some of these speeches. He polishes them. He's not necessarily an orator, but he knows how to get people enthusiastically excited and to, you know, he's always recruiting, right? And you see this front and center with Wilmon, and you also see him somehow being able to discern motives of people who are kind of impure to his cause. And so that he's never caught off guard, or he's not caught that off guard. He's always got kind of a plan B, or he's kind of watching people suspiciously. And I think Mask of Fear, Alexander Freed did a really good job of kind of giving us a little bit of that insight with Saw Gerrera. We don't get insight specifically to the way that he thinks because it's through the vision of another character. Please go watch Lauren's video on Mask of Fear. She talks about all of this stuff as well in a lot of detail. I think you'll enjoy that over on the YouTube channel. But you know, I think it's just another great piece of content that fits together and very complimentary. And then you get to see it front and center here with Wilmon, and you get to feel that speech. And if you're in Wilmon's position of high stress, you could see his hands shaking as he's trying to get the Rhydonium out, you know, and then he has that moment of relief and success. And then, you know, Saw just kind of leans in, starts sniffing, you know, getting all high and crazy. And, it builds Wilmon up, and that excitement is contagious. And then he's off and running, and now whatever Wilmon's going to become here in the next year is going to be something to watch.
Yeah, it was infectious for sure, as is all radicalism, right? I mean, that's the whole point. I just want to go to the comment real quick here. Israel Allen's put in, interesting. I don't think the dude was actually a traitor. Saul just looked at Wilmon and saw an opportunity to acquire himself a valuable resource in Wilmon, and likes to keep his circle tight. That could be true.
It's a valid position to have. It wouldn't surprise me. I think Saw is certainly capable of that, and will call the herd if he has to. But I think he actually was a traitor. I think Saw probably actually saw something.
No, I think he was a traitor too. But if he was not, I would not put it past somebody like Saw Gerrera to have planted all of that stuff as an example to just kind of entertain himself. You know what I mean? Like, he's crazy. You don't know what you can't believe half the things he says right now. So he might have just done that just to do it and just called him out as a traitor. And who knows how Two Tubes is in on this. I don't understand really that relationship either. But
I think this is the thing that the book talks about, not to keep waxing on about Saw, is that he inspires loyalty, and the people who are around him just absolutely
fiercely loyal.
Yeah, fiercely loyal. Great way of putting it. They will follow him to the very end. And we see a lot of examples of that, and the book really does a good job of painting that as well. Even though there's people with doubts, he gives them a reason at some point to follow him into hell and back.
Yeah.
Even though he will not necessarily, pull them out of hell when he's ready to go.
Right. Certainly if it benefits his cause, he won't You know?
They know what they signed up for in his
Exactly, just like he said, or like Andor says.
But to Zeral's point, he's not above like using a bit of propaganda and some of that to get his point across. And then I don't say outright betraying the people around him, but he is capable of if you're not all the way with him, he will cull the herd.
Yeah. Yeah, Wyatt says in terms of books for Saw, Mask of Fear, besides Mask of Fear, Catalyst, and Rebel Rising. Yeah, we've talked about both of those as being great additions. It just rounds out the whole Andor, Rogue One, Mask of Fear kind of, I don't know, sector grouping of storytelling around that guy.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to Andor, Bix, Luthen, and Clea. This is going to be the first part of it. I had to group them up because they were all kind of intricately involved, and then the Andor and Bix will break off here in just a little bit. But this opens up the very beginning, the very first episode. Bix is still having her nightmares. She's having these horrible nightmares of Gorst, and that scene was very interesting because the guy that's in the seat is the guy that we later learn about was someone that saw Bix's face, and Andor. Yeah, and then Andor decided to take him out.
Saw Gerrera. I was like, what are you talking about?
No.
My bad.
He saw Bix's face, and Andor is in that. I didn't even mention this as far as like a year later. Like there's a level of paranoia now around Andor that we didn't see in that first arc. Like he was on his toes, but it's reached a level of like true paranoia. He doesn't want to show his face anywhere. He doesn't want to go on long walks to certain parks because of cameras. He hated the fact that somebody saw her face. And, again, maybe because she's had other run-ins that we don't know about in that last year. And so he felt like he had no other choice but to kill him. And then he justifies that murder by saying, look, he was one of the bad guys. You and I are here because he's dead. That's what he signed up for. That's the risk he takes, is being part of the Empire. Right? He's trying to rationalize all of that, knowing that he probably didn't have to kill him. And now the only person that's suffering from that trauma is, unfortunately, Bix, which is, kind of unfortunate again. But
yeah, the guilt's really weighing on her at this point.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
That she's responsible for his death, even though it wasn't her decision to make. It was to protect her because she is not strong enough to be able to do this. And Adria Arjona came out and then talked about, like, this is Bix at her lowest, right? So we're going to see the upswing now of what all of this toll takes on Bix, and now how far she's willing to go. And we see that turn by the end of the episodes here, but you see it, she's just totally broken. I mean, she's desperate. She's not really sure where she fits in any of this. Like when Luthen comes and checks on her when Cassian's away, like, yeah, I came to give you a mission, but no, you're a hot mess. We can't do this right now. It's not the right time. And of course, then he finds the stimulants and some of that to help her sleep and gives her warning about it. But
yeah,
you can just tell, like, I mean, the way they painted this from a color grading perspective too, of the safe house on Coruscant, totally gray, drab, whatever. And it's not until later, even when she puts flowers in there when Andor comes back, there's still not a lot of color to it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Not a lot of vibrancy. There's not saturation. Very intentional, right? To make this feel like you are in this claustrophobic environment that you just can't get out of. It's a nice place, right? It's functional, but you're a prisoner in your own home type of situation, which is, I think, what she's really struggling with. I think even Cassian, to an extent, is really feeling that cabin fever setting in a bit, because it sounds like he's not as active as maybe he would normally be, because he wants to be there with her, and then she feels like she's tying him down, and she can't even go do missions, and they don't trust her, and it's just kind of a mess all the way around at this point, because she's just she's not trustworthy in the field, I guess, is from Luthen's perspective in particular.
Yeah, I want to touch on something like you nailed it, like as far as the coloring and all that stuff. But the other thing too was the actual room that they were in. Like, it was, the floor plan was literally a box. You know what I mean? Like talk about like saying I'm boxed in on something. Yeah. They were literally living in a box of 4 walls, and everything was in there, which is like a really, really open floor plan. And at the same time, like, I think you're right. I think Cassian is feeling that, but at the same time, he feels safe. Like, he's fine with giving up all of the liberties and all that stuff, so long as it assures them a level of safety, right? He's okay with, hey, let's just stay in. Let's not go out. It's fine. We've got everything we have right here. And that's, that is unfortunate. Again, I don't have a better word. It's kind of sad, I guess, is where they are. And for Bix, Cassian probably could continue to live on like this, but for Bix, she's just feeling absolutely trapped, feeling a whole lot of guilt. And she needs a way to kind of normalize things. And she thought by doing the flowers, that was going to normalize things. Again, she's gone into this kind of substance or whatever it is for escapism and to get away from the nightmares that are happening. But she does say something that when they're making dinner, when they're prepping for dinner, he's talking about, we're safe here. He tells her, he says, I love you. And she has that line of, she's like, I'm not Marva. I'm not your sister. And she says, if I'm giving up everything, I want to win. We have to. And we see, and I'm glad, we hear that. I think we heard that in one of the trailers when she said that. And I don't remember what we theorized was going to happen when she said that, but I do like that the payoff from that line specifically comes at the very end. The very last thing that happens is she wants to win, and that is enough for Andor and for Luthen, which I thought was really great, right? Because it almost felt like Luthen was kind of pitying her, and then at one point it felt like he was okay with just axing her because she was becoming a problem and too much of a burden for Cassian to bear. But I do like that the two of them worked out a way to hopefully give her peace, which is the payoff with Gorst at the very end. So
but
really
like
good stuff there.
But like most stories in this series, the coin has two sides, right? So the benefit, the perk to some of this is that they kind of have this loving domesticity as a result of some of this stuff too. They have a lot of opportunity to spend time together. You can tell the relationship is they finally kind of come together, probably in several ways at this point. It seems like there's a level of intimacy that they've been able to finally overcome those obstacles from a year or two ago and finally lean into some of that. And we finally kind of see that as the tag team and the partnership maybe finally coming to bear at the very end, that payoff, right? But you get to see some of that connection and that bond truly forming a bit, even though there's distrust and there's some tension between them. But you at least feel some of that. So again, everything Tony Gilroy and the writers have brought to us, you have the coin and you kind of flip it to one side or the other, depending on what you want to see or how they're kind of feeling in that moment. And they're conflicted by this every time, which makes it more interesting in that respect.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's talk about the meeting here next that happens with, I guess, a reunion between Lonnie Young and Luthen, which we hadn't seen since, that big, powerful, dramatic speech from Luthen in season 1. Yeah. We learned it's been about 3 months since these guys have been together or spoken. Lonnie tells him that Deidre is now running Ghorman, which is throws Luthen off. Like, what in the world? And he calls her a hunter, right? Not she's a hunter, not a spin doctor, right?
Right.
For his mind, it's all about propaganda out there. And I love the fact that they don't really know what's going on just yet. Even Luthen isn't aware of why there's such an interest in the Ghorman. But he tells Lonnie, I need the end game. Like, I need to know exactly what they're doing, why they're doing it. He does also confirm that Mira is off Axis, which again throws him off for a loop too. Cause I think, it's like, okay, well, who's on Axis at this point? And we don't know, of course, until a little bit later. So this all leads to Luthen giving Andor a mission now to go to Ghorman to find out what the heck's going on there. Like, why is the Empire there? Why is there such an interest? Before he leaves, we get a very intimate hand sex scene in Star Wars, because that's all we ever get from Star Wars. They say their goodbye. He leaves, and then this is where we get that first time that Bix is washing dishes, and we see her take drugs for the first time. You're like, holy crap, she's really, really kind of bottomed out at this point. Yeah. We go into Clea, and this is kind of broken up into a couple scenes, but the long and short of it is, they've sent Skolden this kind of I don't know what it was. What was it called? Map, or it wasn't a map. It was like a feely, touchy book or whatever it was. Right, some artifact.
Right. Yeah.
And
it was a book basically.
It was basically a book that you touched to read. In there, they put some kind of a microphone's listening device, and we kind of heard bits and pieces of that. You could hear Skolden talking about some folks, and at some point, I guess he got a bad piece that wasn't authentic, and so he tells everybody, "Look, we're going to have to suddenly reassess these for their legitimacy." And as a result of that, Clea hits the panic button. Luthen hits the panic button because they understand that now that there's going to be this assessment of all these artifacts, they might find that microphone. I thought it was interesting, too, that they mentioned that they had actually some successes with that microphone. They mentioned Yularen specifically.
Yeah. At
one point, I forget the context. I have it here in my notes somewhere, but I like the fact that they actually caught him doing that. And there was another one that was really interesting. So it sounds like, and Luthen says as much as, like, we've got so many bugs and so many irons in the fire that he can't even keep track of all of this anymore, right? It could lead to them getting sloppy, and it could bite them in the butt later down the road. That exchange between Luthen and Clea about this was your idea, I didn't want to do this. And then when she doubles down on him, you said this in season 1 of like, who really is the boss here?
Right.
Is it Luthen or is it Clea? When I saw that scene and the way she spoke to him, I started thinking, holy crap, maybe Clea is kind of like the boss, similar to, you know, the Emperor, who's just kind of pulling strings in the background. But Luthen is really just working at her direction. I don't know. Did you get that sense as well? Are you willing to?
No, I'm right where I was last season, man.
Yeah.
She is intense and she can turn it on. She can turn the charm. She's always scheming, always has something on her mind. But you make a great point, though. The amount of noise that they're having to sift through, and you see it with Clea, too. There's just too much going on. There's too many things they're trying to monitor. How do you get good quality from that if you're overwhelmed by the quantity? And we see the Empire struggling with something similar. Later on, we learn that we can't process everybody because we just don't have the personnel to be able to do this. We're arresting more than we can process.
Right.
So that's why we're not recovering more. And that's why we're not getting better intel. And so it's the story on both fronts. Again, the same coin, right? Just different sides. And so it's really interesting to see that play out. And you're right, Clea is always she's the pragmatist, I think, in a lot of this stuff. She has to ground Luthen a lot of the time because he is that accelerationist, right? He's the one with the scheme. He's the one that wants to be able to, you know, really ignite the fire, set all the pieces in place, and then light the fuse. Whereas Clea is much more methodical about it. Like the right people at the right time at the right place are more effective than trying to pull in these more emotional pieces, like an Andor, right? Or even like Vel. Like these people who are unpredictable don't fit in Clea's world whatsoever. So it's an interesting dichotomy between the two of them, but she definitely wears the brooch and the pants in the professional relationship here.
Yeah. Some of the comments, Alex says, yes, the paranoia was intense, or was tense, just like living in the wild. I'm sure there are assets that experience this lifestyle. There was another one. He said it felt like COVID lockdown in that room. Zeralens, just a random thought, nothing too deep, but do we think Bix and Cassian are actually married, or is that just the guys they put on? I don't know if they would have consummated a marriage. That seems like a little too much for them, but they're definitely a thing. Like,
they're definitely
really emotionally attached. And if you think about it from their perspective, they likely, when they go out in public, do not have any kind of physical relationship because it could draw attention to themselves, right? And so they don't have that. And so when they actually come back to the apartment, they're revved up. Like they've been yearning for each other for so long. And that's why we see when he comes back from that visit, they just jump right into it. You know what I mean? Like it's got to be, you know, therapeutic for them to finally be able to touch and feel each other behind closed doors because they can't do it out in public and on Coruscant.
Yeah.
But I don't know. You think they've gotten married?
No, I don't think so. We don't really deal with marriage a whole lot. I mean, we saw a wedding, of course, in the first
last
year.
Yeah,
but again, I think that was for a very specific point. And again, we haven't seen it here necessarily. But
yeah,
I say that. I mean, we had Anakin and Padme get married too. But I don't know. Yeah, they don't really suggest it, and I think they don't really necessarily have to have it. Is maybe my perspective on it. But if they did, okay, cool, that works as well. But I'm with you. I think when they go out, the paranoia with Andor is really intense. So when they come back, it's finally his moment to breathe, right, and feel safe and feel secure in the safe house, even though it has its drawbacks and its kind of claustrophobia that settles in.
Yep. John Maloney says it's fascinating that Luthen has an occasional stressful blowouts.
Yeah.
He had one in season 1 too. I mean, that guy is on edge all the time. So
well, he feels it. I mean, you kind of get the sense though throughout these episodes, you feel it more and more tangibly that it feels like there are certain things, and it's pretty much in Luthen's space and Mon Mothma that they're just teetering on the cusp of being exposed, and of things really going really, really poorly and really going south. So you feel it more there, I think, than anywhere else. That's the one that's at that tipping point where any small thing, and they're completely out in the open, and things really start to fall apart, and this thing goes away before it ever really started.
Yeah. Oh, that's true. John says she did tell the Empire she was married.
Right. Yeah,
Didn't she tell the shopkeeper that too?
Yeah. Well, I think it was that was back on the other planet, right? That her husband was away.
Oh, yeah. That was back in the first arc.
I didn't
but
quite
she
put
tells
that
the
together.
shopkeeper about her husband. She calls him her husband, I think.
Yeah. That's a good point. I don't know. Yeah. Zeralens, maybe you're onto something. Maybe I just totally went over my head.
Yeah. Something's going to happen to Luthen for the next 2 arcs. Okay. Yeah.
He's going to die. I know that much.
Okay, let's get back over to the story. So, Varian Sky is the identity that's given to Cassian Andor. He's a budding fashion designer. He's going to Ghorman as a rite of passage. Again, a lot of, Paris type parallels here with our own world. That code phrase of "I have friends everywhere" gets used for the first time here. We see it again used twice or two more times later in the episode. At that point, we cut over to Luthen visiting Bix. I enjoyed this. It felt like he was there sincerely to check on her. I know Cassian was really upset. I do think that he probably was going to maybe give her a mission, or maybe that was just his alibi or an excuse to really come in and check on her, because I got the sense after he noticed that she'd been using that he probably, this is just my own headcanon, he might have done that himself, right? And had to deal with it, or try to deal with it, because he even says it works for a while, but the dreams come back worse when you stop. Be careful. I think it was in that moment that he realized, okay, she's going through a lot more. I've been through this as well. And so I think, that coupled with the confrontation that he has with Andor after Andor comes back and realizes that he met with Bix, that was enough for him to say, okay, we've got to help her get healthy. And the only way we're going to help her get healthy is to find some true resolution, give her some closure, if you will. I'm going to use air quotes because I don't know that's the right word for killing somebody, but get some closure to all of the trauma that she's gone through, at least with the Empire.
Exercise her demons, I think, is maybe what it is, or be able to confront her demons directly, or demon, I think in this case. He represents everything that has kind of happened to her, and it represents the ability to kind of grasp and regain control, I think, in a certain way too.
Yeah.
It's interesting how they kind of found him. That part just kind of conveniently happened, so suspend a little belief there. But
sorry, that they found who?
Gorst. I'm talking about Gorst now.
Oh, yeah. They didn't really explain that, but yeah. I'm sure he has. Maybe it's Lonnie or somebody, on the inside. They've got their ways, I guess.
So, what do you think about the exchange between Andor and the bellhop? We got a little more of the history behind what happened on Ghorman 10 years ago, right at the cusp of this would have been right after the Empire was formed. And we have this Tarkin massacre, which I think is actually originated from the West End Games, I believe, right?
Yes, it was the original. Yeah, it was the original Ghorman massacre. And this was, but I thought this was just going to be a retelling of it. And it was going to be even more so. Not to say, not take anything away from the Legends one, because that's almost line for line exactly what happens in Legends, where he lands that ship on a bunch of people that are protesting and he kills hundreds of people. That's tragic, sure, but I thought we were in for something really big. So I don't know. It's kind of cool that we've got, the first piece of it. I like the way it was worked into the story, and that whole monument, and the people of Ghorman, or what was it? What was the name of the city that they were in?
Oh, Palma,
whatever it is. I like that there was, that the fact that that armory that was being built was overshadowing. There's some symbolism there, right? Overshadowing the monument that was made and erected to commemorate the loss of those people. So, but yeah, I mean, the bellhop story was interesting because he was actually trying to dig information out of him, trying to get a sense for how are these people feeling? What's the kind of general consensus of what it's like to be so close and be, around what had happened those 15 years ago. I don't know. It almost felt like he was kind of feeling out, it was almost like a barometer of okay, this is the every guy. How are they feeling? Is this place ripe for a true rebellion kind of thing? Sizing up the general public more than anything else. I don't think he was sincerely interested in what exactly happened to him or any of that stuff. I think it was just more of an assessment, part of Andor's assessment, mini assessments that he did while he was there on Ghorman.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's just something to try to get some sort of start on his journey, and somebody's got the inside scoop. And again, that something happened there so long ago. Kind of is interesting, right? That it took a little while to kind of get this into the open here, and why the people wouldn't necessarily have a more severe reaction to the Empire is a little interesting. You can understand why that tension is there and why they feel so strongly about it with the protests, and how that can be used against them, right? So you start to see some of that happen. And Wyatt was asking in the chat why we didn't hear this from Krennic, a year ago, right? And I think some of the Empire just doesn't care. I mean, the Empire doesn't care about these past events or whatever, and they're trying to do it in a more subtle, backdoor type of fashion. The right people doing the wrong things at the right time to their doing, right? And they don't really care anything about the past. The Empire's moved on, they've forgotten, they don't have any kind of connection to any of that stuff. And honestly, they don't think they don't have really much to fear with the Ghorman people. They're just trying to, how do we get the resources we require in the most economical way, I guess, and try not to have it be as a complete disaster and spin it in a way that benefits the Empire and doesn't add sympathy or empathy anywhere else in the galaxy.
Yeah. There is, I do want to say too, when he shows up as this Varian Sky character, that it's very similar to where we see Luthen in season 1, you know, like just his ability to jump in and out of character, especially when he's sitting there talking to Enza. And, you know, he's kind of berating her about how sloppy she is. And I could have been anybody. And yet you came up to me and you took that risk and you put all of us at our risk, put all of us at risk. It's very similar. He's almost talking like we saw Luthen in season 1, right? There's that development of him now where he's become Luthen in a lot of different ways. And especially in the way he's portraying this character and so flamboyant at times and smiling and cuts right back in. It's all stuff that he's learned. And, you know, we see it from Clea and Vel and everybody else as well, and Mon Mothma. Everybody has to put on this facade, but I just loved that we got to see Cassian Andor, or at least Diego Luna, do some of that acting here.
Yeah, agreed.
He goes into that fabric visit with Rylance, who's I guess the leader of Ghorman Front. I took that as it was a legitimate front. I just don't know that they can do a whole lot. Like, it feels like, yeah, they've got good intentions, and that's why Luthen knows about them, because they're probably a potential group that could turn into something more than that they are. But I mean, they're really a bunch of fashion designers that are just upset with the Empire. So they're not really a true front. Like, they're not a rebellion. They're not outbreaking. I mean, they couldn't even use weapons, and they had to bring in some extra help for Luthen, right, to kind of really get them going. But I did see them as probably being organized in the sense, at least, that they were starting to uprise as best as they could without any kind of help from Luthen or anyone else.
Yeah, and look, they just don't know what they're doing, right? They don't know how to go about doing this in a meaningful way. And the subterfuge aspect of it, and you're right, they don't have the expertise to be able to, and they're trying to find the right people to help kind of teach and coach them, but they kind of want to do it their way too, because they don't want to lose their way of life. They're very attached to their core culture and values, which I think is fantastic, right? And you don't want to lose your core self in some of this stuff, but I think that's the sacrifice of the level of rebellion that they think they might want, but maybe they don't think it's that bad, right? I think some of it is, are they really taking it seriously, is what the message kind of comes from Andor, and even from, you know, Vel and what Luthen's trying to interpret too when he sends in Plan B. Are they really taking it seriously? How committed are they to actually seeing this through the end? Do they know what it truly takes to be able to have an uprising and make a difference and start to move towards open rebellion? And I think the answer is largely no, they don't. And they definitely don't know the potential cost, and they don't have the discipline to be able to really hold themselves in check, stick to a plan, the things that end up costing Senta at the very end.
So as he's there as Varian Sky, he's kind of going through his assessment, right? He's walking through, he understands what they want to do. They want to steal some weapons and, stand up against the Empire. And he basically goes back over to, what was his name? Rylance, and says, look, essentially, you guys aren't ready. And this is so Cassian Andor here in the moment. And I love the way this scene plays up with the scene when he meets with Luthen on the ship, and they have that whole exchange about you're thinking like a soldier, you need to think like a leader. That's exactly what this is, because if you think about it from Cassian Andor's perspective, he is so paranoid. Again, like we said, so he's so paranoid right now that when he does his assessment of where Ghorman is at, he doesn't feel it's worth the risk, because he says, you're going to be stealing weapons like in your own backyard, essentially, and you have nowhere to go. You're going to expose yourself. All you're going to do is get yourself killed. It's not a good deal, right? And so Rylance gets mad and, goes back to Luthen and says, look, I wasn't impressed with Cassian Andor because you sent him here to help us fight and to put a plan together to stand up against the Empire. He basically said, we're not worth it, and all we're going to do is get ourselves killed. And that leads into the exchange that he has now with Luthen, because Luthen says, you need to think like a leader, essentially saying, the way I interpret this was, hey, they have money, they have a lot of power, and if they die, it's probably okay, because as a leader, some of these people are going to have to die, right? You have to give them the opportunity to stand up, and yes, they're going to expose themselves, and yes, they're going to have a great loss of life, but this is what it's going to take, right? It's not going to be, we can't sit there and just constantly run and hide from the Empire. At some point, people have to stand up, and you had an opportunity to really empower them and persuade them to stand up, even if they would have failed, right? we've got to start. This stuff has to start happening, and it didn't because of him. And I don't know. It was just a great exchange between those two, and it made sense now in the context of the trailer. I wasn't really exactly sure what they were talking about. I thought it was going to be the actual Ghorman massacre that he was referring to, but it was. I love the fact that it was really about Cassian telling him to stand down rather than stand up.
Yeah, and you start to see the oncoming storm. You know, what'll happen in another year or 2 years from now of what will actually ignite this whole thing, right? So
yeah,
some of where these would be rebels kind of feel and how they are, as well as the what I think what Luthen's trying to get them to recognize as well. And again, he sees it as more opportunistic, right? He's that accelerationist mentality of saying,
yep.
Look, if something bad happens and the whole thing ignites and blows up, it will be brightly. It'll burn brightly. It'll be a beacon, right, of what the Empire will do. It will accomplish our goals one way or another, whether we're successful in kind of mobilizing and organizing, or it all blows up. We have very little skin in this game, and it sets us off in a direction that still inspires other places and looks at a planet like Ghorman, who we learned in the first week, or in the year before, that they have political influence, they have power, they have resources, they have things of interest to the rest of the galaxy in some way. But you're the propaganda machine kind of working in too. And I know we're not really talking about Cyril right now, but that propaganda machine in the way that Ghorman is viewed is already starting to tarnish some of that. Yeah. And I think that's what Luthen is trying to also get ahead of, is like, these things just don't add up. So what do I need to do now? And then what do I need to start building insurgency wise to see if I could build something up here? Because the rest of the galaxy might be changing its perspective on the value and the interest and the overall, involvement of what Ghorman looks like and how much they care, especially if they view them as elitist. And quite honestly, they kind of come across that way sometimes in some ways, right? When you see the fine twills and whatever, they market it as very high end. And, hence why we saw that video that Krennic lays out in the first year.
Yeah, and we heard it from Edie's mouth in this episode too, when she was talking about Ghormans, about how they're arrogant and et cetera, right? So some of that is probably reality, and some of it, maybe most of it, is probably coming from the propaganda machine to kind of set all that up. All right, to kind of close the rest of this story before we get into the very end, which we'll do in a minute. This is now Luthen. They've had that exchange. He goes home to Bix. We talked about that scene where they kind of reunite, and he finds out that Luthen was there. He goes back to Luthen, confronts him, and they both come up with a plan, right? He says he's got another, he doesn't say anything. He leaves, and then it ends with that kind of a signal that Luthen has another task for him, and Bix says, I'm going with you on whatever this one is. And so we'll kind of pause it right there. I want to go into Mon Mothma now, and then we'll come back to that ending and talk about what happens there with Bix and Andor a little bit later. So Mothma's was kind of short until we get to the big Scullin kind of festival or party that he's got going on. But I like the very beginning. We get this kind of montage of her going around trying to garner support for the PORD, the PORD thing, which I think was, if I remember, it was like either the right to imprison people or the right to keep people in prison for a long time. It was one of the two.
Yes,
I forget now.
Yeah.
But whatever it was, the point of that whole sequence was really to show that, look, she's out there doing the legwork, and she is trying to rally any kind of support that she can to fight and push against the Empire. She talks about this in Rebels. She talked about this in season 1. She's talked about this in the last arc, Mask of Fear. You saw some of it there, but she's trying to get support. I thought it's very deflating though. I love that when she finally broke and was like, okay, this isn't going to work, was because she was going to the actual senator of Ghorman, trying to get him to stand up to the Empire. But because of what happened 15 years ago and the fallout from all of that, he's too scared and doesn't want to say it. At the same time, I think I don't know when that was now, but that line of like, are we trying, she says it in one of the sequences about, are we trying to find criminals? Or are we trying to make criminals? Which is exactly what, Deidre's doing here and all that.
Right. And
talking about the crime rates rising. And she quoted like 38% crime rate in Ghorman. That seems like it's probably inflated, and it's all because of what Deidre's doing, right? She's trying to make these guys look like the bad guys, but unfortunately she's not getting any support. People don't want to stand up, and it just kind of takes the wind out of her sails. That's why she looks so defeated, and this is why we get it later on. I think it was in Star Wars Rebels where she gave that speech in season 3, episode 13 or whatever it was, talking about how I've tried to do everything I can in the Senate, and it's just not working, and so now therefore I'm suddenly going to become a leader of the Rebel Alliance.
Yeah, you truly start to see the fear that the senators have of retribution from the Emperor directly.
Yep.
and his lackeys and his cronies. And I think that's the thing we're starting to see is how many times can we speak out and be kind of smacked back down? And Mask of Fear did a great job of portraying some of this. And Mon Mothma internalizes that because she went through various forms of torture, psychological torture, physical, things like that, at the onset of after Order 66 and the onset of the Empire. So she gets it, but I think also she's in a position now where she's like, she's learned that lesson. Like if we sit back and don't do anything, it will get worse. It won't get better. It will get worse. We keep sacrificing more and more and more. We get to the inauguration where they're all chanting. You see that disdain, right? The things that we're chanting and the enthusiasm everybody else has, she doesn't, because she understands that those values have eroded so severely that the words are empty and they're all catering towards a view that is effectively, energizing, Palpatine's base to an extent, right? And I can't think of the word I'm trying to come up with here, but it's not the Senate that she had. She's lost all confidence, lost all faith. We see it quite clearly here, and we see it with her colleagues. They want to do the right thing. They recognize what the right thing is, but they're unwilling to do it because of the consequences that will, and rightfully so, be present if they do. And they know what will happen, and they just can't sacrifice that. And they're not doing their people a service either direction they go, because their people will suffer. This is the tyranny of the Empire, right? This is what they do. And so it's not necessarily surprising us as a viewer, but it is good to see it kind of happen. We see the effect it has on Mon Mothma as a leader of not only what she feels is a valuable democracy, but the erosion of that democracy so severely that it just doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah, this Oathkeeper guy, when he was chanting, "Upon my life and honor for peace and bounty of all beings, my full allegiance, a galaxy of worlds, a galaxy assembled, an empire." Like, what in the world?
Yeah,
I don't know.
You talk about ratcheting up, ratcheting up the. I don't know, man. It's something special. They have come up with something special.
Yeah, it was great to see that, though. Honestly, it's sad, but really cool to see that that's where the Empire has gone and where the Senate, and they are all chiming in as well. So
they're shouting at the top of their lungs.
Yeah, and we've talked about this a lot, and I've never really thought this was a possibility, but we've come up with all kinds of reasons and explanations, excuses maybe, for why Palpatine kept the Senate around for as long as he did. And if this is the current state, right? If we've seen that these senators are falling in line and they're chanting this, against their will or willfully, either way, then there's no reason why he would abolish the Senate, for all the reasons that we've talked about in the past of like, it makes sense for him to keep him around as long as he does. Now, at some point it breaks, of course, and he just gets rid of the whole thing.
Right.
But, and then you've got people that are throwing these extravagant parties, right? The rich are starting to see that there's money to be made in joining politics. Holy crap, this is starting to mirror real life. But, they're starting to see about how much money they can be made in politics. And so they're willing to join in. And so every time you get somebody that's eager to join in, these younger politicians, then those are more people that he has to help manipulate and control the galaxy at large. So right now, at least, 3 BBY, it feels like he's got a pretty good handle. And he does have some support, enough support in here that he would not be looking to get rid of the Senate as much as the Mon Mothmas and the Bail Organas and all the other senators that have been a kind of a thorn in his side. As much heartache as they've been giving him, it makes sense that he would go ahead and keep the Senate around for as long as he did. We'll make sure we've already hit the hour mark on this one, but we get into Skolden's kind of ceremony dinner, right? This is where Clea and Luthen are both at the party there. Mon Mothma, Perrin's there. We've got Lonnie Young. Krennic has shown up as a guest, and who's the new guy? Was it Hearth?
Hearst, I think.
Hearst, I don't know, that other guy. It was her assistant, I think, from season 1 or whatever it was. But
the brown noser,
the brown noser. They're all in attendance. But as Perrin and Mon Mothma are showing up, we get the recast that we were speculating on for Benjamin Bratt playing Senator Bail Organa. And again, I know we talked about this at the beginning. I think it's great. I don't mind it at all. I don't understand for one bit why people are upset that they brought him in, especially given the circumstances. If you actually go look, which is probably part of it, right? People haven't researched exactly why. And this is one of the only things that came up in my feed was that they really just couldn't get Jimmy Smits. It was a scheduling thing. They had all intents and purposes to get him and they couldn't. And so the show must go on. and you bring in somebody like Benjamin Bratt, and it's like a perfect fit as far as I'm concerned. And I don't really care. Like I've said this so many times, the characters for me are more important than the actors. And that's how it should be, I think, for a lot of things. And so whether that's, and again, I don't want to be too controversial, but whether that's CGI or whether that's deep fakes or whether that's an actor that looks like him, I don't care. I'm more interested in the story. I'm more interested in the characters themselves. And so I completely wholeheartedly accept and am grateful that Benjamin Bratt was able to come in and kind of take over for Jimmy Smits here.
I thought it worked really well. I think at the end of the day, regardless of kind of how you feel it worked, I think maybe the pushback or the question is, was the scene needed? Did you have to have it? Maybe the answer to that is no, but at the same time, I think we kind of want it to be there. Need it, maybe not, but we kind of want it to be there. We want Bail Organa. We talked about this in the first one. Like, where's Bail?
Yeah.
Bail's a part of all of this, right? Bail is there. Him and Mon Mothma have a history. They have a relationship ongoing of where they stand in this rebellion. It makes sense for their worlds to cross and collide and sometimes work in concert, sometimes work in conflict. So it works for them to have some sort of appearance together in this series. And maybe this explains why that is so small, but it was still important to acknowledge that it was there. So I'm glad we have it. And Benjamin Bratt, again, he looked the part, he sounded the part, it worked well. So I don't know what it's unfortunate. It's disappointing Jimmy Smits wasn't able to come back for it because he's just played the role in, several times now over the many, many years. So disappointing in that regard. But at the same time, show must go on. Jimmy Smits supported this as well. So it's not like he was being stepped on or being cast to the side or, in some way throwing shade at him in any kind of capacity. It was just, like you said, unfortunate events, prevent you from able to do it. And you still want to be able to present that because it's important that they still show up, right? That they are part of this in some way, even though we're not focusing on Bail Organa as part of the story right now.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the point, right? He's going to show up later. We suspected as much. This isn't the end. And so to go back to the question of like, did he have to show up in this scene? No, he could have just showed up in whatever the next arc is, or maybe it's the final arc. I'm not really sure, but you're just planting the seed that, oh, don't forget, this guy's around and he's going to play an important role or will play a part in all of this in later episodes. And so, yeah, there we go. Okay. So, and yeah, I'll just kind of like really summarize because it's really, there were some great moments here. We know Clea is trying to get that mic off there, and she's using Lonnie as kind of like this human shield to block her view or block their view. The entire time though, really what stands out is Mon Mothma and Krennic just going at each other, as polite as can be at times, and sometimes getting a little bit.
That was polite, man. So nice.
It started off polite,
not on the witness stand.
Yeah, I know, okay. That was. It was just these like uppercuts and jabs
right away.
Yeah, right, throwing elbows from the beginning. So, but his line of "My rebel is your terrorist," right, as he was laughing, that was like perfect because what is the line? What's the difference between a terrorist and a rebel? But the fact that it kept escalating. And the more it escalates, if you look at the characters in the background, they're awkwardly looking around like, what is happening here? Are they really going to go at it kind of thing? But
can we move on from this conversation?
Yeah,
please.
It was great. Was it John? Somebody brought up Perrin's. Yeah, he says, watch Perrin step to Mon's side when she was going toe to toe with Krennic, whether for show or true support. Nice move. So yeah, another feather in his cap for those that maybe hated him in season 1. So at least he's willing to step up and stand up against her. But which is kind of a big divergence if you think about it. It has been a year, so who knows what's happened. It's been actually more than a year now. But he was so rubbing elbows with the rich and the powerful, to see him kind of now in this role, at least in this moment, is kind of good to see.
Yeah, and maybe we'll come back as a Patreon episode and talk about Perrin in more detail, because I think it is probably maybe not important is the wrong word, but I think the character of what we see in season 1, what we see now, and the more that we've learned about him and Tony Gilroy's perspective he's been able to share, he was really disappointed how people received him in season 1 in particular, right?
Yeah.
So I think understanding truly who Perrin is might be worth more of a character spotlight. So maybe we'll come back to that once we're done with all of kind of the rigmarole here of getting through all the content, and be able to revisit some characters and some themes afterwards in Patreon.
True, because he could still turn out to be a total a-hole. We'll find out.
I don't think that's.
I'm kidding. I don't think he's going to. No. Yeah. When Gilroy said, "Okay, look, I get it. People weren't really supposed to kind of take that away, and I understand why they did it, and I'm going to try to redeem him a little bit in season 2." then I'm like, okay, I just misread it, but it's fine. I'm just joking.
Pretty sure we all interpreted the way, maybe not even what we wanted,
right,
but we interpreted the way it was written.
The way it was written, we certainly did. But that all ends with Luthen and Clea leaving. They're kind of having a happy moment. They're like laughing, right? When she says, "You're welcome." And, he laughs and he says, "We should have killed Krennic while we were up there." And I thought,
that's probably true.
Had they only done that, who knows what would have happened, right?
Yeah, because they would have canned the Death Star. Yeah, there's a whole thing that what if? Only.
Yeah.
We should do a what if episode again.
Yeah. No,
it's been a number of years since we've done that.
4 years since we've done a what if episode.
We're due.
Okay, now let's get into the real nitty gritty stuff. Let's get into Cyril Karn and Deidre Morrow and their kind of story. So we get Cyril going to work, right? And he's just living his best life. He's got this new promotion. He's out here on Ghorman. He's being watched. He's paranoid. Again, all this stuff I was thinking, I was like, wow, he's really worried about this. And turns out, no, he was not worried about any of this.
He sold it like a champ, though.
Oh yeah, he's in his A game, man. Like, this is the stuff that he lives for.
Yeah.
I like the little string that he was using there to kind of test to see whether or not somebody was breaking into his apartment while it was happening or while he was gone. That was all intentional. And then when he starts FaceTiming with Edie or whatever it was, like, I'm like, oh my God, this is my life. Anytime my mom calls or I have to talk about my mom or relatives through tech support, where he's like, he was facing the wrong way or something. And she's just gaslighting him the entire time I forget what she was saying, but it was just kind of crazy, that whole conversation. And I get it was just to kind of help transition and get him going there. But he kind of felt felt like a year later, he wasn't as submissive as he's been in the past with Edie. It felt like he had a little bit more backbone. So maybe that was as a result of what happened with, Deidre's threats to Edie. But yeah, it was just great. So she's still saying, he was throwing away his life and that, he should have stayed on Coruscant and all that. And he just like hangs up on her at the very end as she's still saying goodbye. All right. That was really kind of just, I love that he did that to her and stood up to her in that way.
So it's like part Cyril with a little bit of backbone, but also part he needs to play it up. She needs to be sending that message really strong so he can send the counterpoint to it.
Yeah.
Right. Because he's playing it up. So it's serving his interest to do it. And he's almost using his mom to be able to prove the point, because she's just going to take whatever she hears and what Uncle Harlow feeds to her as fact. And that's going to be her position. Right. And so saying the Ghormans are elitist and things like that are going to, he wants to play some of that up and then figure out how the Empire shapes into this stuff and, be able to play that up with the would-be rebels that are listening to him. So really kind of well done. And you don't get that tip off right away. Cause like you said at the top of the show, it almost seemed like he was buying into it. It's like, oh man, they're not really going to do a turncoat for Cyril. He's going to try to swing to more of a rebellion perspective.
Yeah.
Like, right. No. He's definitely all in on the Empire, folks. Like, don't worry. We clear that up really quickly, but it did give you a bit of that moment of hesitation. Like, is he just kind of fed up?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right? At least you had to ask the question there temporarily, and then they double down. And then, the complexity with Dedra Meero and trying to say, is she really, this is where you got to watch Declassify, because she talks a little bit about this too, about her character.
What did she, go ahead. I mean, go ahead. Declassify. What did she say?
Yeah. So basically she views Dedra Meero is kind of a psychopath, and she's like, she's not the kind to go and do the killing herself, but she will definitely put others in position to go do it for her. And I think that perspective is really what you start to feel in this sequence of what they're not telling Cyril about what they want.
Right.
So is she willing to sacrifice Cyril? I think to that extent is the questions that start to come to mind of what does he think his role in this? And then what is the reality of what his role actually is, of what Partagast has approved and what they're doing, right? And that's maybe why I don't know, all the following and stuff. I don't know how genuine some of that is, or if that's, her hedging bets, or if it's even real in some of that stuff, right? But it's just kind of interesting, though, that she definitely is playing him, because she's not equipped for this relationship, right? Cyril desperately wants it, right? Cyril wants to be recognized, wants to be loved. Dedra Meero wants to be respected and wants to be in control.
Yeah.
Right. And wants to influence. That's a really dangerous concoction there when you have that. And that's one for abuse in that relationship, of course.
Yeah. That's kind of, I'm glad you mentioned it, because that's essentially what my take was on this as far as where it's going. Yeah. Even the thing about like turn off the lights. Like, there's no romanticism whatsoever in any of that. Like, it is just, she is fulfilling a need and he is the one that's available. That's it. Again, he's being used even at that level, but he's too dumb to realize it. And maybe he does, and he doesn't even care. This is just been his whole life. And you've no more now that we know as much as we do about his mom and the way she's treated him his whole life. It kind of makes sense that he's okay with some of this happening to him. I don't know. It's a weird. They said it was going to be a weird relationship, and boy, it has really turned out to be a really weird relationship between those two.
It is the coldest relationship, and just like you said, just odd. I mean,
there's
even the peck on the cheek, right? This is the sequence that we saw as part of a pre-release video or a TV spot or whatever it actually was, and it is just as awkward as it was in the TV spot.
Yeah,
and then they turn the lights off, and you're like, oh gosh. I don't even want to watch that, like, because that's just weird. Like, do they even know what? I'm not.
I don't know how that works, honestly. Yeah, it's like 1 hour and whatever. But no intimacy whatsoever there.
Yeah, there you go. That's a great way of putting it, Albert. Thank you for being a wordsmith.
Speaking of which, Sir Allen's earlier, I just want to highlight this comment. She says, speaking of Edie, I know they're terrible people, but I always look forward to any scenes with her, Cyril, and Deidre. Pure comedy, great way to give some levity to an otherwise heavy show.
She is just she's perfect. She just leans into the character, right?
Yeah. When she was going on about the Ghormans and how arrogant they are and the stuff I was like, holy crap, that's my mom when she's been on Facebook for like 10 minutes and then calls me. I'm like, Mom, stop reading that. That's not what's happening here. Get off Facebook. An opinion
after 10 minutes of reading Facebook.
Right, exactly. Yep. They just nailed that so perfectly. And where was I here? Okay, so the Ghormans. All right, we know that the Ghorman Front has been monitoring him. They've been following him. They've got the office tapped, and for them, they see him as kind of like this perfect person. Then later on, don't jump ahead right now, because later on, when they pull his file, they realize that he'd been kind of ostracated by the ISB, and he was dishonorably discharged. He was disgraced, humiliated. He was fired. All of that, and so they look at that as like, okay, there's leverage here, right? We have somebody who already hates or probably hates the ISB for what they did to him, and he's in the know about what these shipments contain as they're coming in, and so they're going to try to use him, unfortunately, again, as leverage and as an inside source to understand truly what the Empire is trying to do in building that armory, or at least confirm whether or not they're building the armory. So all of this works really well. I do wonder if that file wasn't purposely slipped to them, by Partagaz or even Deidre or maybe even Cyril himself. But
remember, I think it was classified. So they declassified it specifically so they could go find it for these rudimentary research analysts and stuff.
Yeah.
So they're definitely making things easy for them to locate and find and then feel better about themselves. And again, the point is they want to empower them, right? They don't want to just expose them and then shut it all down. They want to empower them because they want more of this behavior. They want to embolden them to where they start taking bigger chances, bigger risks, bigger spectacles, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's all sowing the seeds. Yeah.
Cyril is also given that little spider thing. By the way, Alex, my brother, I don't remember this, if he's still awake, he pointed out that the use of that spider was, and I don't know, maybe this was in Declassified, but he said that's an artist that used to create these spiders, and they look exactly the same and all that. So I don't know. I'll let him explain it. Or maybe we'll post it on social media. But I was like, holy crap, he's absolutely right for once. So anyways, he's given this little spider that has a message in there. When he gets there, it's got coordinates to where they're going to have this kind of assembly town hall meeting kind of thing. He then reports all that up to Partagaz and Deidre Morrow. And they have that little, the exchange there where she's talking about how he says it is definitely the Ghorman Front, that they've contacted him. He explains everything that they've done, and he wants her to tell Partagaz, sorry, this is just the first meeting that they have. And he's yearning for that recognition, right? He wants to have that stage in the limelight. He wants to feel like he felt when he felt like he was purposeful and doing something of worth. He had a value to him when he was back on Morlana 1, right? He wants to recapture that. And so he's doing everything he can to get Deidre to kind of help him with that.
Did she roll her eyes, or did she have a moment of guilt when he said that?
I don't know. But yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, because you're like, what did she just do there? Like, is she, again, I don't know how sincere she is in any of this, to be honest.
Yeah, I couldn't tell which one it was. Either she was like, oh my gosh, seriously, quit sticking your nose up this guy's backside, or she just starts to feel bad a little bit and have a conscience. Doesn't seem quite like the character, but Probably more the former, I would suspect, but I really don't know. It was very ambiguous, which I think is the point.
Oh yeah, here we go. Look, Louise Bourgeois, I guess, made huge spider sculptures that represented her mother. It's a parallel to Cyril's relationship with his mother. So you got to see the spiders; they're identical in every way. So we'll figure out if that was something that they did. She was also, quote, French American, is what he says. So the French influence came from there as well. He would know that because he's an artist. I'm not. Okay. We talked a little bit about the ISB meeting, and this is where Deidre realizes that her former assistant is now taking over the Axis. We talked about this earlier. You mentioned her seeking power. He even calls her out on that and says, look, I'm not seeking glory, right? You were, and that's why I was put on this project. And she's upset and she's burnt because they worked together in the past on this project, and she's never once approached him. She didn't even know that he was on this. And so, that's kind of probably burning her up a little bit. But yeah, we'll see where that goes. I'm not sure how much more they're going to expand upon that. Cause at some point Axis does have to come back into all of this. And so their relationship isn't over just yet. Mm-hmm. They have that Ghorman meeting, the town hall, right? There's the guy that we'll talk about a little bit later named Lazine, who's really outspoken. Yeah. He gives him the rude, vulgar hand gesture. Right. I'm going to do that to people and just like, buddy, that's what I think of you. But he also meets Sam and he meets Enza. So Enza's the daughter of Rylands, and Sam is just the guy that's going to, cry later down the road here. But yeah, we get the sense they don't like what the Empire is doing. And then we get into the ISB raid, which again, hats off to Cyril Karn and his performance, because he's perfect in this. Of like, he's so mad that this is happening, and he's trying to pull clout and pull rank about, no, we're not going anywhere. We're in the middle of an audit. You can't tell us what to do. But, we all knew where this was going to go. I do wonder if the ISB knew that he was in on it.
Yeah.
Or
they did.
You think they did?
Yeah, this was all staged. Yeah.
Okay. It's all staged. All right. There's a part of me likes the fact that they didn't know, and that Cyril was just doing a crazy job of acting and really selling what was happening there. But
right.
I get it.
It works either way. Yeah.
It works either way. Yeah. I love it later. So, then we get we get a meeting with Rylands and Enza. He says they do what they want. So this is now where Cyril goes out. He meets those two and starts saying things to them that they want to hear.
Right.
Right. He says they do what they want. They have their own rules. Nothing else matters. And you can see Rylands is looking over like, whoa, this guy is like the perfect guy. Like, he's already got it. He understands where we're coming from. We just need to churn it and get him to convert just a little bit here. He talks about the ISB is running a shadow government. And he's like, yeah, they probably could be running a shadow government, right? Just giving into all of it. And then this is where Rylands propositions and says, what if we can help the Empire by working together? And of course they want him to find out what's on the transport ships.
Right.
Cyril makes a backup copy of everything. He gives that holochip to Sam. And this is all kind of setting up the big, takeover of the steel, the heist that's coming here in just a little bit. They look at the data. They realize that there's a military aspect to all of this. This kind of confirms in weapons, and they're probably, the rumors of an armory are likely true. And did I lose you or did you lose me?
It doesn't matter. We're online.
Okay, we're still online. We're still live. We'll have to edit that out. Note the time, 1 minute or 1 hour, 24 minutes. We get the awkward turn out the lights thing. We've already talked about that. We don't need to talk any more about that. But that whole line, I want to get into just this one last moment here where he gives Edie that little spider.
Yeah.
That had me in stitches because she's like, oh, this is Cyril. I'm going to name him Cyril. The silence, the brooding, the disregard for common sense. Be almost like having you here as he's eating cereal, which is a great callback to season 1. And then we get that whole Good Morning Coruscant thing. Yeah, thank you, Zoralans, for saying the same thing there. That was really funny stuff. Okay, last parts here. We're coming to the very end here almost, but we've get this the meeting finally between Deidre Partagaz and Cyril Karn. This is like his first true time and appearance in front of Partagaz. It's his moment to shine. They talk about now, they're biting into everything that he's done. I like that he called him inexperienced, but very eager, right? He was talking about, they were really talking about Cyril Karn,
Right.
kind of behind his back when they said that. But he comes up with this idea of like, hey, we need to strike right now, right? We need to put a plan in action, give them that confidence, and then after they win, we can retaliate. Basically, they're creating these guys as criminals, as Mon Mothma said earlier on. And when he says "excellent work, Cyril," you could just see it all over his face. Like again, like we talked about, this was the moment he was been waiting for it. And of course, he says that line: "If I say this is the greatest day of my life, does it spoil everything?" And her response of "It's good to see you happy." There wasn't a lot of conviction there. Again, like I can't tell if she's just reading from a script because she knows she's supposed to say something in that moment, or she sincerely felt like, hey, it's good that you're actually happy for the first time. Or I don't know if there's any sincerity there whatsoever, but what do you think?
Yeah, Partagas doesn't really give out compliments that overtly either, right? Usually they're kind of in a backhanded type of way, usually at the expense of somebody else in the circle. So you could definitely tell that he's playing it up for Cyril because he wants that pride to shine in him. And again, it kind of goes back to like, what's the final angle here? And maybe we'll find that out next week, when we jump forward a year. But yeah, Dedra, this is where you're just not sure which side of the fence she's on. I think this is where that interview in Declassified really makes you think more about, does she really know what she's doing? And she's okay with sacrificing whatever this is, this relationship that they've got going, which she kind of seems to like a little bit, but is not her comfort zone. So maybe she's willing to sacrifice it because she's like, well, I lived before this, I'll live after this.
Yeah.
The Empire is what kind of matters most in my career in that perspective. So it'd be interesting to see how she really sets this all up and what Cyril's kind of involvement and response to all this looks like. And it kind of calls into question of like, is Cyril the next one to kind of go? But I think that's still a ways off.
Yeah. Sorry, I got to go to the comments because One Up has broken the seal on this one. How is there no Andor cereal yet?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's an atrocity, and they should have already created one. In fact, there is a great marketing opportunity right now to create an Andor cereal, and in each box there is a small spider toy that you can dig out. It'd be perfect, right, if they just do it. Alex says, haha, Andors, what kind of marshmallow shapes would they have? I guess little rebellion symbols would be in there.
Yeah,
for the marshmallows.
Stormtrooper helmets. Yeah,
Stormtrooper helmets.
You could go a variety of ways.
Yeah, I'm trying to think what else. All right, we'll have to think about that and put some thought into it.
Clearly the important things in life, right?
Yeah, right. That's why these people are tuning in for this show. The last part before we get into Vel and Cinta is we do learn that because of Dr. Gorse's efforts and the success of that has garnered the attention of the Emperor. And he's now wanting to expand this into a single person, now into a true full-fledged program, which is scary to think about. I assume we're going to get to see more of what this looks like later in the seasons. They wouldn't just drop this and let it go. I mean, we kind of knew that this is where this was going to go at some point, right? They weren't above torture and whatever they needed to do to extract information, but they have a working formula here with what Gorse was doing. And so it's fitting that the Emperor would be like, hey, yeah, let's do more of that and let's blow it up. Partagas does assign Lonnie and Hurt. I already forgot the guy's name already again. But he assigns those two guys as kind of being the point people to ensure that, quote, the Navy doesn't screw this up, right? Or whatever it is.
Right.
So, yeah, I think there's some pride in what he has had Dr. Gorse built as ISB, but now it's being turned over to the military. So not good for citizens of the galaxy at that point.
Right. Yep.
Okay, let's get into Vil and Cinta, and then at this point we're going to combine everything into we'll kind of wrap up with Vel and Cinta, which really isn't a whole lot because they're just there to execute on the plans, and then we'll finish with the Gorst scene. But I want to just quickly I wasn't expecting to see Cinta come back, I guess, in this role like the way she did. We learned that they hadn't really seen each other, like you said, over in about a year now, that something happened. I'm assuming like you took away that this was whatever happened with Tay Koma was related to whatever this incident was, that she had to be sidelined and she was hurt for over a year. Mm-hmm. They missed each other. We get the sense that also Luthen was trying to purposely keep these people apart. And later down the road, I think Vel is the one that says we're worth more separately than we are together. Which is very powerful because there's a relationship here, and we see that, right? Any thoughts around, I guess, the reunification of them two, and Vel's role, I guess, in all this?
Yeah, I think it's more Senta's journey, which again we get a small flavor of, but you see the shift from someone who's all in on the rebellion. They just kind of get what's left, and they knew that was going to be basically nothing. And Vel kind of recapped that for us on the journey up the mountain in the first, in the year before.
Right.
But I think Senta having more perspective, right, being on the sideline, not having someone to be around to help, to take care of her, to be that companion, to that someone you can trust and rely on, and wanting to reach out but not being able to or not being allowed to, whichever one it might actually have been. And yeah, Vel sees this for what it is. Like, Luthen wants us to be apart because we're more strategic for him in that way, but they view that they are much better working together, and that's what they want to be able to do. Because for what you're fighting for, if you don't have that, if you lose sight of the true reasons of why you're fighting, and you sacrifice all of that, what have you truly won? You don't have a plan of what's after all of this. Like the whole idea of hope in Star Wars, and I think hope in general with Rogue One, and like that comes through a bit in the nature of this relationship. And I think that's important. We have glimmers of that. And if you don't have that end goal in mind, that you actually expect to survive and you expect to have a better life of all of this, you end up very much like Luthen. You end up a bit like where Cassian is kind of starting to skew, right? And maybe even other characters. So you get consumed by it. And so I think that was one of the takeaways I had in some of the scenes that they had as they start to navigate their relationship and where they've been and where they wanted to go, with those realizations that happen when you cut your hair. I mean, it's really, really, I'm joking, but I mean, those are the things you really you take away from those scenes, I think. And they're subtle in a way, even though they're quite overt about what they're talking about, but it comes back to the ideas of hope and where you want to be once this is done, and thinking more longer term rather than what's in front of you. And you just keep pushing and fighting and killing and doing and whatever, just to serve someone rather than something. Right?
Yeah. Wow. That's beautifully put, man.
It happens every once in a while. Don't expect more.
Don't expect it. Yeah.
Right.
Don't raise the bar here. Okay. It was very sweet too. Like, I love the fact that they both chose this mission because they knew that the other person was going to be there. They have that reconciliation a little bit later. And of course we talked about the scene that was shown. And they're talking about how they're worth more together than they are separately, at least to them, but not to Luthen. And so I think it's Vel that says they're going to have to, confront Luthen and explain from now on, we are a thing. We're going to work together. That was my take. Of course, that doesn't never going to happen now, given what happened.
But it's kind of but really, it's like Andor and Bix as well.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. There's a parallel there.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, they're there kind of to put a plan together to execute this heist and the take the weapons. And so they go through this whole process of scoping things out, sizing up, coming up with the plan. They're very specific about it. I thought Vel shines in her performance here and how she's kind of laying down everything out. You can tell her and Cinta have done this before, and this is kind of just secondhand for them. But but the key takeaway from all of that little montage that they had was she doubles down a few times, like nobody's supposed to have weapons but either myself or Cinta, right? No exceptions. No one needs weapons. And she goes through the whole thing about if they just prep and they follow orders, everything is going to go as planned. Of course, that doesn't happen. So we get to the heist. The Ghorman Front is in the process of stealing their. Of course, everything is being laid out by Partagaz and the Empire, allowing them to feel like they've got to win and feel emboldened by all this, so they can frame them as the criminals a little bit later here. Their plan is to kind of put these EMP things on the ground that blow up one of the transports. I think we predicted as much when we saw the trailer. This is kind of essentially what they were going to do. They take the carrier down, they take the weapons, they're shuffling them off to another area where they're loading them up and they're going to take them away. And you got the sense too, I do want to make, I don't know if it was kind of subtle, but you got the sense that people like Sam and some of the other people in the Ghorman Front, although they weren't prepared to kill and they weren't actually kind of military people, they had it in them and they wanted to get there. They just didn't have the experience and they didn't have the weapons to do so. And so it makes sense that somebody like Sam would suddenly have shown up with a gun, even though he wasn't supposed to. And if you think about the chain of events, there was that one old lady that comes in and I forget the character that walks her off, right? That set everything in motion because she was gone, they had to wait one more minute. And because they had to wait one more minute, Lazine decides to come into the scene, right? And that's what kind of spurs on this whole, battling with the blaster, which ultimately ends with Cinta getting shot and being killed. So it's kind of tragic in the way she died. It didn't have to happen this way. It just kind of came down to had there not been any weapons, and certainly if that old lady hadn't been there and had the butterfly not been there as well, then none of this would have happened. But I wasn't expecting her to pass. I think we had said that Cinta wouldn't make it out of here. I think we even said Vel probably didn't, if I remember correctly.
Right.
But I guess I wasn't expecting it to be in this scene. And this part did feel a little like, I don't know, predictable maybe, or maybe even tropey, but it did not take away anything because of the way, and I forget the actress who plays Vel, but her delivery in that last scene as she's crying and she's really laying into Sam about, why are you crying? This is like skin, right? She was a warrior. She was blooded warrior. She was a miracle, whining, simpering, foolish child. You'll make this up forever. You'll have to make this up forever kind of thing. That was really, really powerful stuff. So again, another arc where we got two really great speeches here, but just vastly different in how they were delivered and the intent.
Yeah, you see the inexperience, right? And you hit it, I think, perfectly. They're not able to accommodate these impromptu scenarios that come up. They don't have the experience. You only get experience this way, but again, it's not losing your cool, and it's doing as you're told and sticking to the plan. And everybody knows their role and they do their part, and that they follow through, because predictability is what's going to save your life or stick to the plan, unless you have to severely deviate because everything just falls apart.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't get to that point. It shouldn't have had to get to that point.
Right. Yep.
I mean,
Yep.
we could argue about whether that, like, why was there so much conflict between the characters? I think Sam was just overeager. I think, to your point of, we want to fight, so we feel like we have to overdo it, right? You have the kind of the macho masculine type of stuff came through, especially when you feel empowered by having a firearm with you, right?
Yeah.
And so sometimes that happens with some people. I'm not saying that's ubiquitous, but it happened in this situation with a young guy with a lot of energy and a lot of passion trying to exert authority, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we see that type of scenario. But, I think you touch on something here that I think we've seen some feedback elsewhere. I think we had it on Discord as well, that these 3 episodes felt a little prescriptive. Like, they were not necessarily, surprises. They felt like they were very, like, we could anticipate what was going to happen. And the progress of what they went was just, very, like you said, not tropish, but at the very least, it's just something that we could have picked out, right? We could tell you if you stopped at mid episode, yeah, I think it's going to kind of go this direction, this direction, this direction. And you would probably have been like 90% right. So I think that's valid observations, and we'll have to see if that feedback is warranted in a critical fashion. I think, again, the issue with this type of series is you have to let the other stuff play out before you can see what are all the things that maybe we didn't catch the first time the seeds were laid, but we sow those later on, and we actually benefit, we reap those later on, rather. So we'll have to kind of see how that plays out. But I think your point was taken, that we expect some of these things to happen. We know we're going to lose people every single episode. There's a question about there in the chat, who dies next, and we can maybe talk about that here in a minute. But some of these things are going to be somewhat predictable, and some of that happens because we know where we're going. And so some of these things have to happen, and we know this season is full of tragedy, and we know things, while they will perk up, they will continue to fall apart in many ways as well.
Yeah, Wyatt said, I was expecting that Cinta would die during the Ghorman massacre, but yeah, her death is sad, similar to Brasso's death.
And this one had a little more weight to it than I think Brasso did, which I was thankful for. But it also felt still just a touch underwhelming. Like, it's, for whatever reason, we're not having that depth of resonance. And if it wasn't for the speech that Vel gives at the end, and the passion, and again, some of the relationship building we had, it was just very quick to get through it all. And then, of all things, it's quick, but we had to move through those motions at a pretty good pace, with just their sequences. And then, did it feel like enough? And then to finally reconnect and then have it taken from you does feel, very standard in that kind of way of, like, we kind of set it up when we knew it was coming.
Yeah, you're right. Because, I mean, if you think about, we got the sense that they had a relationship last season. We knew that they had a relationship last season. That was cut short, right? It was, unrequited love in some ways, at least from Vel's perspective, because Cinta wanted to put the mission first before she put them first.
Right.
And then we come back to season 2, and we see Cinta very briefly in the last arc, but she's not in this the same kind of role, right? She's kind of an assassin almost at that point. And so we're left with very little screen time with them to really kind of reconnect with them. And yeah, they had some nice moments, and we said it was great that they reconciled things and they reconnected, but it just wasn't enough to really kind of give you that emotional depth that you would kind of want or expect to have, having lost a character like Cinta. Again, I do say that I think it's made up by the speech that Vel delivers and the emotion that's being delivered there between both her and Sam. But I can see where it probably felt a little underwhelming just because we just didn't have enough time. We really didn't have enough time to connect with them. And that's probably a byproduct of, again, not having a full 5 seasons like it was originally intended. And we've condensed it down to, 12 episodes over the course of 5 years or 4 years or whatever it is.
Yeah, it looks like Wyatt agrees with you in the chat. And I think some of this is probably the point, right? Of the losses you experience during war, you don't really have an opportunity to grieve in any kind of way. And they feel like you are having to move on really quickly, and you kind of lose a part of your soul as a result of some of that, because you don't have that mourning and that moment of grieving and taking the time to kind of feel and through that, because you just don't have the time to be able to do it, and it informs where you're going later on. But We'll have to see where we pick up a year later when we pick back up with Vel and see what the ramifications of some of this mission are.
Look how much time Leia had to mourn for Alderaan. 0.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's get into the Gorse piece and kind of wrap it up here. So Gorse, we get caught up with him. We see him. He's going into the office late at night. That was a dumb choice.
Yeah.
He's got his little pastry there that he picked up at I don't know where the heck it was. It looked really good though. But he heads into the elevator, heads up there, goes into his little office where he tortures people. And when that light came on and Bix was standing there, I was like, oh my gosh, this is not going to go well for him. She tells him to get in the chair. He looks at her, he realizes, he says, I know you. Like he remembered her from, a couple of years ago. And her line of it will only feel like forever. That was a good callback to season 1, because I think that's exactly what he told her as he was about to torture her with the screams of the children on whatever planet it was that they did. I mean, how horrifying can that possibly be? But puts the headphones on, cranks it up to 11. We kind of pull back. It's deadly silent, which I love the fact that there was no audio there at all. And you can just see him going into like convulsions and suffering from everything that was going on. We got to see the scene from the trailer where she's walking out, a lot of conviction, just shoots that one guard, sends in, like without even a hesitant. She's so stoic in this moment, right? The entire time, the way she's walking out, a lot of confidence. Girl's got her groove back, if you want to coin a 90s reference. And she goes out. Andor joins up with her. Like it's almost someone's going to set this as some really stylistic music, and it's going to be absolutely beautiful at some point. Maybe I'll do this. I don't know. Someone will do it. But yeah, detonating that thing and blowing up Gorse. So not only did I thought they were just going to let him just die. Of course, once she walked out, I was like, okay, here's the scene where they blow up that whole thing. But I do wonder too, like, it's probably therapeutic for her, right? In the sense that she can, like I said earlier, she probably hopefully has closure now for all of that. She doesn't have to worry about that demon of Gorse still haunting her and her memories and all that. We'll see where this goes a year from now. But I do also question if they blew up that whole thing, is his his research, is that lost, right? We talked earlier about how they were going to expand all of this. They could have just let him sit there and just die with that apparatus thing on, but they decided to detonate everything and blow up everything. So I don't know. I don't know where that's going to lead to. Maybe it was just a way of like, hey, 2 in the head, 1 in the chest kind of thing. I don't know. What do you think?
How's Luthen going to respond to this little wayward mission as well, right?
Well, I wonder. Well, so is it wayward? Because remember, Luthen signals them for one mission, and she says, I'm going to go with you on this mission. Again, my take was that Luthen was like, okay, we need to get her healthy. And the only way she's going to get healthy is I'm going to send her on a mission to get rid of Gorst. And he pulls whatever strings he has to get him up there. And so they take her out or take him out. But I mean, I could be wrong on that too.
No, that actually would make sense. And I didn't connect the two right away. But as soon as you said it, I'm like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. He's found the connection. He found him out. And again, that's the way to kind of get her back on the right path. And I think also to get her over the hump of how far is she willing to take all of this stuff and not be passive about it, continue to be a victim. Now she feels empowered by taking his life. And like you said, she's just kind of a walking badass as she leaves the place. And, no prisoners type of mentalities. It'll be really interesting to see what happens next for her. And unfortunately, this is kind of where you set up a character. They've had this big, great moment. It kind of feels like Bix gonna die next episode. So
maybe.
Yeah, we kind of get to that. We'll segue into some of that here in a minute. But it was nice to be able to see her take that back. I'd like to have more time with her. So I would like for her to survive another year before we get the inevitable, I think. But we'll have to see how that plays out.
Yeah, and it would be it would not be uncharacteristic of Disney. I know I've said this so many times on the show, to give us a female character, set them up as powerful, emboldened, whatever, strong, and then they just axe them off like immediately. So,
well,
I will say this though.
To be fair, though, I think that's the story, right?
Well, it happens all the time in Disney with Star Wars too. But regardless, I think going into the series, I was expecting that we were going to kind of see this downward spiral of her, and that would ultimately be her end. Now that this has happened in the second arc, and I almost suspect like she's probably not. I fully expect her to be okay. Like she's going to have, put away her demons or whatever, and she's not going through all of this in the next year or whatever. But I don't think she's going to get out of the series. I will say that, but I think it's going to be more of a, kind of a hero's death, right? And not necessarily a crazed, bottomed out kind of death that I was expecting to go, just because of the scenes that we had in this episode that we were speculating on from the trailer.
Yeah, we'll see if like a heroic death is actually what we get, because no one else has really got a heroic death, right?
No.
I think she will at least have kind of more of a warrior's death than what we were on the track we were trending towards before, which I think I'm very appreciative of. I think is a great character, and see her rebuild herself, and that's why we hope we have more time, because I think if that is her fate and that's her inevitable end, then it'll mean a little bit more, and it'll be more rewarding that she died again trying to win and going all in, and not feeling like she's a victim, and she's actually contributing in her own way too. So a better fit for the character overall of where she's come from.
When they come together at the very end, if you look at Bix, she has a little smirk on her face. Right. And so
she's got her groove back. You hit it right on the head.
Yeah. There, I do wonder too, like if in season or the 2 BBY, which would be the next arc, I do wonder if we're going to see, I hope we'll get to see them kind of working as a team, because we really haven't had that. We haven't seen them kind of gelling the way they probably can, especially now that she's got this all off her back. I'd like to see all that, but we're just running out of time.
Like Mr. and Mrs. Smith style. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. We get to see them paired up and just being, a dynamic duo as a family, or a husband and wife, or, partners, or whatever they are. Mm-hmm. It would be kind of neat to see that. But then you think, okay, where does K2SO play into all of this? And so that's where this all ends. I guess if you had to make a guess of where 2 BBY stands, or maybe here's a better question. Do you think we get K2SO in this next arc, or do you think they're saving him for the final arc?
Well, we know we get him in episode 8. They've already told us that.
Oh, they did confirm that. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, so we will have him in this coming week. So so the question is going to be, does K2SO show up at a time when maybe Andor loses someone, or or even Luthen, right? I mean, we have to. The reason why I think Luthen is on the table is because I think the last year. Do we need that for Andor to finally come into his own of the character that we see in Rogue One, right? Is that the time where we actually see all of that happen? And I think if the last 3 episodes lead directly into Rogue One with like no time in between, that has to happen this coming week. It has to happen in BBY 2, right?
Yeah.
Because then you've got the year to grow, and then you see it all, and then he's in Rogue One. You have to be the same character at that point.
Yeah. So
I think it's got to happen in BBY 2, and I think it's probably going to happen maybe in the second episode of that arc. So then where does Bix fall into that too? And I think again, it's with Bix, it might be the same thing there too. I think we're going to see some more of that loss, and we know we've got some sequences with Clay and Andor that appear to be one of a lot of mourning. So I think this next arc is going to be probably this tipping point where things really, if they're not serious yet, I think they get a lot more serious than they are now. And I think the stakes really get amped up, and we start to see where we're heading, and the overall influence of where this is steering becomes much more evident. And we will have a very different slate of characters leaving this next arc, I think.
Yeah, I'd like to see this next arc kind of, I don't want to say primarily be about the relationship between K2SO and Andor, but I kind of need that after the comic book. And it's something I'd like to see, and then leave that last arc for really to spend a good, 45 minutes total time. Maybe not a whole, maybe it's a whole episode. I don't know. But it feels like that Ghorman massacre has to be huge. You know what I mean? And so it feels like we're going to end with that. That is everything that's being built up. They've already built it up from this arc and the one before. So that's probably how they're going to end it all. And then maybe that last 10, 15 minutes is all of the stitching together to kind of transition us over into Rogue One, and, really pull it all in. So,
So do you think the Ghorman massacre is going to be like this next week, or you think it's going to be right before Rogue One? Because I'm trying to also figure out like where Mon Mothma's speech comes in. I mean, it all feels like it's coming right into this next week, like a year before the events of A New Hope, effectively, right? Or,
if she's going to give the speech, that was in one BBY, if I'm not mistaken, from like Rebels, right? When they picked her up.
So that's this coming week then.
So maybe they leave us with like a cliffhanger. Maybe it's, there's a to be continued kind of thing that happens. I don't know. That doesn't make sense, I guess. Maybe not, because it's 2 years, but or a year that passes.
It's going to be a big week. I mean, I think this is the one that people are going to point to and be like, okay, that's when everything kind of went down. This is when the top blew off.
Yeah. Yeah, TBY is when her speech is. That's right. So that would be this next episode.
Next week.
So the Ghorman massacre would have to have already happened. So that means K2SO could potentially be a part of it. So, man, sorry, there's a bunch of comments in here. I didn't get to all of those here. Here's a new one. Light Blinded Fool says, I think the massacre is going to be next week, and then we get to Rogue One the following week. Yeah, that's kind of likely how we're trending here at this point.
Yep.
All right. So great arc. Again, probably not for everybody, but if this is your tea, then you were probably drinking heavily here and really enjoying it because, again, very dense, great story world building that happened here, and certainly sets up a lot of growth for a lot of these characters. I am really intrigued to see where Wilmon goes now, especially now that he's paired up with Saul, and they are hitting the hard stuff with the Rhydonium. I don't know where that's going to go, but that's kind of bizarre. And the Cyril Karn storyline, that is getting more intriguing too, because I was not expecting that I didn't know what to expect from that one, but I like where we're going. Everything else seems to be trending and tracking the way we kind of suspected, given what we knew of this era. But those two are the ones that we just really had kind of no clue of how that was going to go. Luthen was kind of quiet in this episode. So, I hope that he gets his moment and we get more of, I want to know more about his background, which again, I'm starting to think now maybe they're not going to reveal, given that we're just running short on time, and I don't know where that opportunity would come from. But I do want to know more about their relationship and Clea especially. But any thoughts about where we're going next and what you're looking forward to?
Yeah, I think it's going to be what's the catalyst, right? So how do you get from Ghorman where we're at this week to a Ghorman a year later, where things amp up to the extent? So what has been going on? What has the Ghorman Front been doing to really ratchet the intensity up to where you're just waiting for that spark? Again, I'm really, really interested in who lights the fuse, right? Whether it's intentional on the Empire's part. Like right now, it's kind of like everybody's in play.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's the thing. We don't know. Empire, it could be the local citizens, or it could be, Luthen and Andor's team. There's a whole slew of people that could light this thing up and for their own purposes. And oddly enough, it all serves the same purpose. They all think it's going to serve the same purpose, but of course it's going to lean a certain way, unfortunately. So it's going to be interesting who lights the fuse. I think that's the part I'm most interested in to see next week, aside from, of course, K2SO coming back, but from a story element side, everything's going to start coming together a little bit more. And then Mon Mothma and what the escalation of things in the Senate, we got a good, a decent view of that this week. Where does that go and then take us next week to where we get this epic speech? And I think, again, you're looking for monologues. I have a feeling we're going to get a pretty good one.
Yeah,
we might get multiple of them, right?
Yeah.
And so I think those are the things that we're kind of on slate for and on tap for. I think that's going to be a great week next week. It's probably going to be another really tough week for us to get through. Commend you. You've done a fantastic job of kind of walking us through the episodes and the way we structure all this. So kudos to you. This is not easy, folks. And Albert's doing an amazing job here.
Oh, no, thanks. Same to you, my friend. And you know who else receives many thanks?
Yeah, lots of amazing comments out there. Thank you to everyone who came out. cantinacast.com/YouTube. If you're listening to this, we'd love to have you join the chat. We had a really great showing tonight. Special thanks to Alex Music Train, Risk Bayless, One Up versus CPU, My Star Wars Guys, Zeralin, Wyatt, John Maloney, Light Blinded Fool, Steph slipping in there at the very end. If I miss anyone, not intentional, thank you for coming out. We see the folks in the background. We really do hope you'll come over, leave us a comment. Please like the video. Let us know what your favorite moments of this week. What was your take on these 3 episodes? What are you most looking forward to as we get to BBY 2? It still sounds backwards, but anyway, what are you most looking forward to? We would really appreciate your comments there and let us know what's on your mind. If you'd like to join us on Patreon, cantinacast.com/Patreon. We'd love to have you come out and check that out. Again, we're going to get to the Ahsoka, whatever it was, video this weekend. We do have video, so you want to see that if you're part of the This Is the Way tier and above. Invite you to subscribe to that, cantinacast.com/Patreon. And again, we're going to come back in a couple weeks and do some Revenge of the Sith reviews. A lot of fun with that one and kind of revisiting what we had experienced back in 2005 and what's that experience in 2025 and how was it different? Does it hold up? There's some things that hold up. There's some things that I think are starting to show their age. I'd like for them to come back and redo, oddly enough. So it'll be a fun conversation there. And of course, as we get through the rest of Andor. So thanks for everyone for coming out. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. And don't forget, 4 more days is, a holy day for Star Wars fans. So we've got May 4th coming up. And
Tales of the Underworld. Yeah.
Tales of the Underworld is coming. Although they did announce it's going to come out 2 days earlier on Fortnite. So if you have Fortnite, you can get on there on May 2nd and watch the first episode or the first 2 episodes, I think is what they said. I don't know. I forget now, but
I was wondering what all that was. I didn't read any of it because it said Fortnite everywhere, but
I'm ready, dude. I already did the update. I'm ready to go, man.
Of course you did. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's where my money's going. But we'll be doing some kind of coverage with Tales of the Underworld at some point. I don't know how we're going to do all this, but we will get to all of that as well. And don't forget, we're going to do this all again next week on Wednesday night to do episodes. What is it? 7, 8. What are we're at? 7, 8, 9.
Yep. 7, 8, 9.
7, 8, 9. So, all right, we'll end it there. Thanks, guys, for joining us, and we will see you guys on the next show.
You're still listening? Wow, that's amazing. Well, I'm here to give you the disclaimer. Normally we do a big, long, drawn-out disclaimer thing saying what's what and who's what and all that other stuff, but I think you guys kind of know that Lucasfilm and Disney have no affiliation with us at all, and we have none with them. We talk about Star Wars, which is their property and all that other good, fun stuff, but I think you can tell which is our stuff and which is their stuff. If you can't, well, then send a lawyer to send an email to me, and I'll be glad to chat with them. Other than that, you know what's what, so that's your disclaimer.